I am Anthony Scaramucci, former White House communications director, but also the founder of Skybridge Capital and an American entrepreneur and a lifelong Republican who deeply loves the country. Principle number 12, free speech and the press, they're guaranteed by the Constitution and they are essential to an accountable government. We condemn the effort of authoritarian leaders to impede or control the press and to erode public support for its vital role in our system of self-government. We support measures that expand government transparency, and we want to protect the press from government retribution. And so this is a core guiding principle. It's also the First Amendment of our Constitution. And I think our founders made it appropriately the First Amendment, the freedom of protest, the freedom of speech, the freedom to practice the religion of our choice, and to separate our religion from the government. All of these things were core to the introduction of the American experiment. And if you sit back and look at it over 244 years, it's arguably some of the main reasons why we have been one of the most successful countries in the history of the world. But I want to talk specifically about the freedom of the press, because as the former White House communications director, even though it was only for 11 days, the press and free speech and the Constitution are super important to me. And this is one of the main reasons why I am absolutely convinced that Donald Trump should not be our president going forward, and that we have to get together as a group. We have to put our patriotism first. Partisanship should be deep last, frankly. And we have to think about the guiding principles of our founders and the guiding principles of the Constitution, and we need to oust the president. And there's several reasons for that, but one of the main ones is him constantly subverting the notion and the idea of the free press, calling out fake news, mentioning at CPAC and other meetings that the press is the enemy of the people, or the press is the opposition party. And if there's something in the news cycle that he doesn't like, he does everything he can to hurt and harm the press. And so I wrote an op-ed in April of 2019, which was in the Hill magazine, and it's also available online, to demarcate why this is so dangerous. And so core principle number one, when you think about our founding fathers, they put the free press in there because they knew that they wanted to hold the government accountable. They were rejecting the power structures of Europe and the places that they came from, and they were trying to set up a power structure that was actually quite diffuse. And if you really think about the founders, their core element was to make sure that the people that were put in power to serve the American people. It's not the other way around. One of the problems that the president has is that he's focused on the idea of ruling as opposed to the idea of serving. And so we need people in that position to think about it from a service capacity, but also to think about it from the point of view of being accountable. And so my first day on the job in the White House, one of the things that I wanted to do from the White House press podium was to sort of have a rapprochement and a peace treaty with the press. I thought that the war with the press was totally unnecessary. Granted that the press is not always going to be favorable. Oftentimes, whether it's a Democratic administration or a Republican administration, frankly, they are unfavorable. They say mean and nasty things about all people in power, but the people in power shouldn't be thin-skinned or lack self-confidence or security to be able to accept that. They should be able to roll with it. But unfortunately, the president is not capable of doing that. President Trump is constantly in this vitriolic battle with the press, and he's trying to pit the press against a core group of the American people and to make the American people think that the press is being unfair or not objective. Now, I accept that there has been liberal biases in the media. Certainly, there are certain news organizations that are very conservative, but there's been a liberal bias in the media for a good swath of the American media. But I think my central message to people is, who cares? If you're in that seat of power and you've been bestowed through God's grace and the American electorate the opportunity to serve at the highest level of public service, the American presidency, you should be rising above that stuff. And you should be willing to hold your administration accountable to the American people through the vehicle of the press. And so I think this is super important for the country. It is super important for our children. And frankly, it's super important for our standing in the world because it contrasts directly from autocratic and totalitarianism. And so one of the things I tell younger people when I'm out lecturing is that the free press not only provides a check on our liberty and sort of that fourth estate, if you will, that fourth check and balance in the system, but it also creates this great opportunity for economic innovation and creative thinking. And so just imagine when we're telling our second grade students that they have the freedom of speech and they can talk about anything that they want. They could, if necessary, denigrate or criticize their government. In other countries, some of the totalitarian regimes, as we know, they're not allowed to do that. They can't speak negatively about the government. 2/3 of the internet is sometimes censored in some of these areas of the world. And lo and behold, as these children grow up, they grow up narrow-minded, they grow up narrow-banded from a creative perspective. And there is essential reason why things like Facebook and Apple Computer and Amazon and Snapchat, all of these great American companies are developed here in America through the creative entrepreneurial spirit of Americans. And a lot of that has to do with the freedom of the press. We tell younger people that they can speak freely. They go on and they create and they innovate. Other countries have to steal our intellectual property, frankly, because they don't have that opportunity in their lands. And so what I fear, and one of the main reasons why in August of 2019, I denounced what the president was doing and I withdrew my support and suggested that we needed to replace the president and possibly rebuild the Republican Party, is that the president has taken a very demagogic stance to these things. And what do demagogues typically do? They distort the reality around them. They distort the truth. And they say things in an exaggerated, often non-factual way to draw their acolytes and to draw their supporters in place. And then the other thing that they do is through the bellicosity of bullying, they intimidate their opponents from standing and rebuking them. And so this is a very, very dangerous thing in America. It has happened in the past. It happened during the Joe McCarthy era, but it never really happened at the level of the office of the presidency. And so I am super proud to be here before you to talk about these issues and to talk about how important these issues are for the American people. And so guiding principle number 12, the freedom of the press, supporting journalism. It doesn't matter what side of the spectrum there are. It doesn't matter the opinion of the journalists. What it matters is the integrity of the system and the integrity of our freedoms. And we'll let our citizens, we'll let our great citizens, through their own impartiality or their biases for that matter, to make their own decisions. And so I'm very, very proud to talk about this with you and to stand here as somebody that stood at the White House press podium and reached out an olive branch to the American press and the international press to speak about the First Amendment and that system of accountability that we need to preserve. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.